Let's go on. So what I'm going to do right now is to start a session where I'm going to focus more on the applied science of thermography in sports. And I'm going to focus on three major applications that are related to the injury risk detection, return to play, so injury monitoring, and also the recovery individualization based on thermography results. As you might know, I'm part of the project called ThermoHuman, and obviously, so I would like to introduce ourselves because it's not just me. We are a company specialized in thermography, mostly in sports, but also in health. We deliver and provide cameras, training, and support. And since 2009, we have been gathering a lot of experience, mostly with football teams, but also with other disciplines in more than 50 countries. Why I'm telling you that? Because here there is a clear disclaimer, right? I have a clear conflict of interest because I run a business, I sell thermography, and I know that. And I know that in the European Association of Thermography, this is not very well seen. Because at the end of the day, I'm also a researcher. So today, don't worry, I'm not going to sell you nothing at all. This is not my intention. Obviously, I have this conflict of interest, and that's why I'm mentioning it. But today, what I'm going to do is try to show you all the scientific part. Whatever we are speaking about scientific evidence in terms of projects and results that has been published, or case studies that can help us to better understand what happens when I or we bring thermography to the field. So mentioning that and bearing that in mind, obviously we all know that when we speak about high performance sports, the pain point of every kind of performance or medical department and professional is focused on how can we bring performance to the limit, reducing and avoiding injuries. And obviously for that, you all know performance and mostly injuries are absolutely multifactorial. And we are, as professionals, we are trying to manage the information. And this is mainly divided in two main things: external load, which is very clearly identified by the use of GPS, so how our athletes performs and how can we measure the performance in terms of speed, distance, and a lot of other metrics. And obviously, the turn of thermography comes for internal load, how the subject, how the athlete is assimilating what he is doing, whatever is in training or in competition. And of course, this is another limitation. Thermography is not perfect. We all know, we have been speaking about scientific limitation challenges, but as well, there are a lot of other problems. But obviously, and this is another point where I have a clear conflict of interest because I am, as we all are, passionate about this technology. For us, is a very interesting alternative. Why? Because it is non-invasive, it is fast, and is objective. And potentially we have all read that in the introduction of every single article speaking about thermography, but that's true. And this is a big advantage if we compare this technology to other internal load technologies. So that being said, one thing that I always mention, and I think it's very important to mention that here in, let's say, with a research audience, is that we have to keep in mind that what we live and experience in the research reality is something that is normally controlled. We are performing our testing, our research in laboratories or locations where we have control conditions, where we can control the acclimation time, where we have reliable data. What is the problem? When we are businessmen or we just try, just as a researchers, to bring that to the field, the problem is that the field is different. And it doesn't mean it's worse or it's not possible. The only thing that I want to bear in mind is that when we apply thermography into the reality, we normally have less time to acclimatize. We might have missing info. and we don't have always ideal conditions. But during those years, we have been confirming that even if the conditions on the reality on the field are not perfect as the laboratory ones, thermography might bring reliable data, or at least enough good data. Obviously, we lose quality, and that's true, and we have to know that. But if we keep standard protocols with a minimum quality standard, we will have frequency and consistency. We keep on measuring subjects every week, and this gives us enough statistic power to, in that case, deliver enough reliable data. But always keeping in mind that what I'm going to show you in most of the cases is not as ideal as what we record and measure on the laboratory. So when I was speaking about how fast it is, believe me, this is important. And again, I'm not telling you the software. In here, I just want to show you how is that normal data collection utilizing thermography. As you might see, obviously, we all know that the camera, in that case, the software, the tripod, control conditions. This is just a fitness studio, so the area where the athletes are normally training, a gym. And what we are doing is just reducing the acclimation time, making sure that the players are inside for 10 minutes and asking them to stay in front of the camera 10 seconds, 5 in the front, 5 seconds for the posterior side. Why is that so important? Because if we don't get the buy-in from the players, normally it's even not a matter of the players. We just don't get in the routine. And thermography is not, again, a frequent and consistent technology that is used. Then once I show you that, and this is also something that we repeat ourselves, the idea is that how can we turn skin temperature metrics in a fast and non-invasive technology that can help us into identifying fatigue and managing injury risk. In other words, our main, not vision, but let's say slogan is that we want to turn thermography as the GPS of internal load. Why we repeat that? Because one of the main problems of thermography nowadays still is that most of health and mostly sports professionals are not aware that this is a technology that can be used for measuring internal load. So our main challenge is still on spreading the word of how thermography can help our practitioners. But again, the point of today is to focus on the 3 main applications we are covering and bringing you some new research and some new cases. As you might know, the main focus of this presentation and what we do with the teams are focused on analyzing asymmetries as a main metric, speaking about injury risk. For return to play, so for athletes that are injured, we also use asymmetry in order to give you a benchmark of how normal is the evolution of the asymmetry of the injured area in comparison with a healthy one. And lately, and I'm speaking lately in the last 5 years, we have been also utilizing, in that case, temperature, global temperature, and coefficient of variation. So the evolution of each individual over the time to determine if there are 2 different types of fatigue and what is the best recovery strategy that we can customize. Based on those 3 main applications, let me just start with injury prevention. That's to say, to speak about asymmetries and gathering some of the main data that has been published in the last years. Those are results that are basically, I'm sorry because this slide should be in English, is basically summarizing the 4 main research that has been published in the Spanish, the Portuguese, the Brazilian leagues, comparing 2 different seasons where thermography was applied as a method of screening and filtering players with big asymmetry, and how the injuries were reduced, the muscle injuries were reduced in comparison with the previous season with no intervention of thermography. As you can see, in most of the cases, there was a significant and relevant drop in muscle injuries. Nothing new in here, right? So that's why this is the good news. Now, the bad news. the reality tells us that even if we have been speaking about the capacity of thermography or skin temperature to reveal asymmetries that might be related to an injury risk, one of the first things that I always mention is not all asymmetries mean injury. And this is very important because we have seen that still today we have a big, let's say, noise ratio. In other words, we have too many alarms that are not always showing up with an injury. And from the other side, mainly in high sports, we have been dealing with a lot of experiences with people expect from thermography to capture and spot every single injury. And that's not true. Not all injuries show up with asymmetries. Mostly we have observed that, for example, with obviously bilateral injuries or more central injuries, like, for example, adductors. But the reality is thermography is not perfect, is sometimes noisy, and is not perfect. And one of the main slogans also that we have developed in the last years is that we are better telling you when than where. In other words, when we get an alarm on a specific location, it's not always that the injury might happen exactly there. Let me tell you an example of that. This is the mechanism action of a recent injury in a rectus femoral. As you can see, the players just go, shoot the ball, and he got injured in his left rectus femoris. Let me give you some insights about this case. What I find extremely interesting in this case is the fact that we are not perfect. This is an international player that has been performing during the preseason. And what I'm showing you here, and let me just show you here, this index that you can visualize in the upper side of this avatar is just representing the number, the global number of asymmetries. And we consider asymmetries everything that is above 0.3 Celsius degrees. So in this first period, what we observed is that this player was mostly symmetrical, right? Then what it happens, and in here this is very important because we are combining the thermography data with GPS data, the total load. We see that during the first weeks of the season, the player performed let's say a well-established load balance, and then he was performing 2 consecutive matches with the national team. After this period of time, then we observe that the player is coming, showing up, and reporting pain in his left knee. And actually, what is important, and as you can see here, he was complaining about his left knee, and we were observing the increase in temperature. And after that, what was the problem? The problem was on the, as you can see here, the rectus femoris. Here, obviously, the impression, and that is actually the discussion that we might have internally with the medical staff, was that thermography was not right, because actually we were not getting any kind of alarm on the area that was affected. But on the other hand, and remember the sentence, we are better telling you when than where, we were observing a clear increase in the number of asymmetries of his guy over the time. And this is very important because, again, this might be noisy, but the increase and the pattern was quite clear. And even if we observed that those previous days after the injury, the loads were not very high, the accumulation of these 2 games plus the pain on his left knee was significant to get injured in that area. That being said, then let me jump to the second application, return to play. And this is ideal because what I will do is just to follow up with the same example. What I'm going to show you here is just remember that not all tissues react the same way. Manuel Siguero is there because he was the author of this paper almost 11 years ago. And
5 minutes.
Thank you, Manuel. And in here is just basically to make the point that most of the tissues are reacting hot, but remember that muscle and nerve are dropping temperature. And in that case, what happens? So indeed, you can observe perfectly here this image right after the injury. And what I want to show you here is that one, the evolution, the gray zone is what we have been describing as the normal pattern, the benchmark of a muscle injury, okay? And please avoid those speaks. The importance here is the tendency over the 3 months recovery that we were utilizing thermography as a point of reference. And obviously, these two drops in temperature were due to an increase in the load during the return to performance period. This was a perfect case of good evolution and good balance. In this chart, what we are showing is the evolution of the total load of the player during the whole period. And that would be like a perfect case of we match that, in that case, GPS data with thermography for return to play. As I know that I have not a lot of time, this is another case of a re-injury where we got 3 different injuries. So the first injury in the calf with the drop in temperature. And what it was interesting in that case was 2 different relapses. As you can see, in every relapse, there is a drop in temperature. And what was very important in here, that this relapse was after increasing too much above the normality. In here, we're speaking that around 0.3 Celsius degree warmer. But again, let me just go through, because what I'm going to show you here is that the last evidence that we have been publishing regarding ankle sprain. So again, this is just the example of the benchmark that we might use for ankle sprain, increase in temperature and the evolution over the recovery period. The same thing for ACL. This has been published last year as well, and recovering up to 1 year after the ACL. And let me show you this very fast but interesting, because these are new outcomes that we will publish regarding muscle injuries, regarding hamstrings, regarding adductors, regarding soleus, and regarding quadriceps. Those are different, as you can see, but just keep in mind one of the main conclusions is in all those muscle injuries, there is a significant drop in temperature if we compare before and after the injury. So again, we confirmed that muscle injuries has an hypothermic pattern. But that let me come to the last part. And Manuel, this is important, okay? Because I will just summarize the main thing about applying thermography in the application of fatigue. This is based on the publication of Robin Thorpe 5 years ago. He was not speaking about thermography. He was just mentioning that if we evaluate players on a match day +1 or match day +2, we should consider that fatigue might have different physiological reasons or sources. One is more, he was calling that structural damage with warm profiles, and that's why cooling strategies are great. But on the other hand, he was speaking about something called metabolic fatigue, a more internal fatigue that will correlate it with cold patterns, and in that case, heating strategies are ideal. What we do, and then let me show you a real case of a Champions League team, where what we are using is on a match day +2, we mix those asymmetry and fatigue automatic AI interpretation. We filter players with a high level of asymmetries. And what we do from a fatigue perspective is to identify players that are getting warmer than usual, comparing with himself, are getting colder. And based on that, we recommend in here cryotherapy or cold water immersion or sauna. And what we have done, and this is the new feature that we are implementing, is this chart that is basically placing players regarding the level of asymmetry. Sorry about that. So in other words, players that are above has a big level of 3, so level of asymmetry. And we mix also the same, but with extremes, or getting hotter or getting colder. And with that, what we do is this fantastic rainbow chart that is mixing both correlation. In other words, we create an intervention chart with basically players that are down and central are low asymmetry and neutral evolution, and players going to the edges and the corners are with big asymmetries and big also change in temperature. Let me just show you that in real time. So as you can see in here, what I'm doing with this team, which is on a match day +2, is just showing the asymmetry and the fatigue. And then when we observe the correlation between both of them, we activate the correlation, and that's great. And then we activate the intervention, and that helps practitioners to understand better. But the point in here is, look, after this match, this team was playing on the Champions League abroad, and they were coming back flying with a big stress. And look how it changes. So what is interesting in here is that a lot of different players were getting up, more symmetry, are getting to extremes. So this is basically an example of how thermography can track over the time, in that case, a match day +1 after a Champions League game, and how can be used. I'm almost done. I wanted to show you some preliminary results, and promise this is this last slide of a fatigue project that we are running for the last 2 years together with a researcher like José Ignacio Prego Quesada as well from the University of Valencia, and José Luis Felipe and other colleagues from the Universidad de Castilla-La Mancha. And just go to the main thing because those are preliminary results. But basically, we have been correlating blood markers, thermography, and wellness markers, among others, with different samples of professional and amateur athletes. What is important here is that we have observed that there is correlations between perception of fatigue and asymmetry metrics related to, in that case, asymmetry and also fatigue. And when performing different types of intervention, cold and warm, after match day +1, we have observed that it seems that whatever we do with athletes, amateur and professional athletes, cold or hot intervention on match day +1 are showing significant drops in asymmetries and fatigue, so in variation of temperatures over the time. Again, those are preliminary, but very promising results. I'm so excited about that. And I wanted to share you that because obviously you might know that it takes time to publish those results, but we are in the way of doing that. Thank you very much for your attention. I really hope that was interesting for you guys. And I give you the word.